Welcome, everyone. I am Ruxana Zia from Center of Learning and Teaching at FCCU. You have already met Fatma, our education developer, and the person behind the scenes coordinating the event is Zarek. He will handle chat and your questions. The purpose of the series is to establish a collaborative community of scholars so that there is peer sharing and learning. The free part of the online course is to provide wider access to national and international scholars, foster knowledge equity, so aptly demonstrated by our experts who have generously given of their time and energy. We are very thankful to them. Over the years, we have developed this course to synchronize with Researcher Development Framework by WITE. This was reconfigured in 2025, and so at present, the 24 webinars provide a strong coverage of the domains related to researcher values, behavior, research methods, digital literacy, ethical and responsible research, scholarly communication and publication, collaborative research culture, but it offers limited coverage of funding and finance, formal project management, supervision and management, coaching, mentoring, research translation, and commercialization. But this course honors our FCC values of service to the community. Registrations for today are immense, for the rest of the sessions. There are 8,500 registrations actually from 400 international. Sorry. It defines the method as a rigorous approach where multiple types of data and analytical methods are deeply integrated rather than merely combined to achieve a common research goal. The presentation highlights that all phenomena are multifaceted and require a blend of qualitative and quantitative approaches and emphasizes the true integration that creates an interdependence where each methodology informs and strengthens the other. I would like now to introduce our expert who has been so kind to be with us from Australia. I think it's quite late in the day for you, Pat. Pat Bazeley is the director and research consultant of Research Support Limited, New South Wales, Australia. She graduated in psychology in 1970s. Pat, that makes you in the same league as me. I graduated in 1970 as well in another discipline. And since then, she has had a career in community development, project counseling, academic research development, and research methodology. You have extensive experience in research design and methodology. And if I'm not wrong, for many people that we contacted at your institution, you were appointed as the right person. Everybody pointed us in your direction as the person to take this talk on. Your publications focus on qualitative data analysis, mixed methods integration, and you've served as the president of Mixed Methods International Research Association from 2015 and 2016. You're also the recipient of the inaugural 2024 Journal of Mixed Methods Research Best Paper Award. So we couldn't have asked for a better person. We're so lucky to have you. Over to you, Pat.
Thank you very much. I will just share my screen. Right, and I think we are away.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that introduction. Yeah. All right, so just to reinforce what was just said, I will start by defining mixed methods because we're talking about what are the essentials of mixed methods research? So there's like a lot of complexity one could go into. I'm going to try to keep to the core essentials. So, starting by defining, mixed method studies are those in which more than one source or type of data and or more than one approach to analysis of those data are integrated throughout the study in such a way as to become interdependent in reaching a common theoretical or research goal. There's a few key words in there, throughout the study is one of them, and becoming interdependent. So the definition says something about the data and the methods used in a mixed method study. It doesn't specify what types of data or methods, and often people do specify there has to be a quantitative and a qualitative method, because I think these are not able to be clearly distinguished and defined. I just say it has to be multiple methods that are used. It specifies the necessity for integration of those methods, and this is what makes a difference between a multi-method study and a mixed method study, is the integration. I'll expand on these, obviously, as we go on. It assumes there's some coherence across the methods in the approach taken and to what counts as evidence. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to arrive at a theory or research goal. And it's expected that the integration of those methods will add benefit in meeting the goals of the research. So let's look at the first of those key points, and that is the kind of data that we use to represent phenomena. So all phenomena, or all things, whether they're seen or unseen, have both qualities and quantities. They are multifaceted, in other words, you can look at them from different angles, and they're multidimensional. They have more than one way of being analysed and looked at. Consequently, we need words and numbers, and perhaps also images or multimedia to record our observations. But whatever kind of data you use, all kinds of data require interpretation, and that includes statistics. So we choose the data and the methods of analysis on the basis of their relevance, not their type. Yeah. The second key point in that definition was about integration, and I've described it as interdependence, and it's a defining component of mixed methods. It suggests that one approach or methodology or method used without input from another is not going to be adequate to achieve the purpose of the research. Each approach is influenced by or dependent on the other. So interdependence is stronger than simply linking or bringing together results of different analyses at the conclusion of a study. And I would argue for what I call iterative integration, that integration is going on even from the time you start to devise the questions that you're going to ask. You're thinking, or you're learning from each method, and each method is influencing the other. So it's finally evidenced or seen in the way that the results and the conclusions of a study are constructed, but usually before then. The third point I had in that definition was the need for a coherent philosophical perspective, or some people refer to this as a mental model or a worldview. The things that we study, the social objects, events and ideas and emotions and relationships that surround us, are philosophically neutral, but how we see them and interpret them is not. So a coherent worldview is needed, and one that embraces all methods. What I mean by that is that we need a coherent understanding of what's real, and that needs to apply to all of the methods that we use. So I absolutely disagree with those who argue that you might have a positivist type approach here and a constructivist approach there, with different understandings of reality. That just doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make for integration. So, for example, you might take a post-positivist approach, where you say what can be objectively observed is independently real, but facts can be influenced by the perspective of the observer. That's used to be a very common approach to mixed methods. It's much less so now. More common now are critical realism and pragmatism. So critical realism or realism is understanding the physical, mental, and socio-cultural entities are real and are consequential. So there are absolute realities, and these are consequential, but our understanding of these is individually construed. So it takes repeated research, perhaps, to get to really understand the reality that's underlying whatever it is you're looking at. A pragmatist, on the other hand, says that we learn about reality from individual experience, and that can vary, and that reality forms the basis of further action. And so that Herbert Blumer was famous for saying what's real is real in its consequences. You can also take a subjective constructivism view, which says that knowledge is contextually determined and constituted by language. So there is no such thing as an absolute reality. It's only what we understand through language. That's a more extreme view. The thing about those views is you really need to. There are other versions as well. I've picked out the main ones, but you need to have. It helps. Well, you need to have worked out what you understand reality to be, in order to be able to apply that to all kinds of data. So turning to the more practical aspects of mixed methods, to design a mixed method study, clearly you need to set out a common purpose for all of your data, and a unified theoretical or conceptual background helps to inform the purpose and the design of the study. You'll then focus specific objectives or research questions, you might have either, you might label them as either, on aspects of the topic or the problem to be investigated and not methods. There are some who argue for having a quantitative question, a qualitative question, and a mixed methods question. I absolutely disagree with that idea. It doesn't help with integration, because you're seeing things in silos. So focus your questions on aspects of the problem to be investigated. So break down the problem. Think about what are the components that make it up, and those become the focus of your specific objectives and questions. Then you'll choose data and methods that will help to answer the questions and achieve your purpose, regardless of type. So you're thinking, okay, what can I find to help answer this question? Rather than thinking, how can I do a quantitative study to answer this question? Or how can I do a qualitative study? It's not that, it's thinking, okay, what information is there and what's the best way of getting hold of that so I can answer my questions? You'll find that research tends to be needs to be planned, but it is a non-linear process. So design strategically, but expect to adapt. Some strategies that help with design are to create a logic model. A logic model shows if-then sequences linking inputs, resources, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. If you're doing an evaluation type study, it tends to take the shape more of a theory of change model where you have a starting point and an ending point, and you hypothesize as to the links between those, and that sets out the sorts of things that you then might explore in your research. You can create a design table, and in this, the columns set out you have a column for specific objectives or questions. You might have a column for theory. You have a column for data sources, for sample, for data analysis. I mean, if there are other aspects that you need to include, that's fine. And then you have a row for each question. And so for each question, you'll work out what data sources I have, what sample I need, how I'm going to analyse it. And of course, some questions will be answered by more than one method, and some entries in the data analysis columns might apply to more than one question, and so cross more than one row. So your table can become a little bit untidy, but it helps you to clarify what it is you're doing. The other thing that helps you clarify what you're doing is to create a design diagram that visualizes the phasing and the flow of the methods and the points at which they integrate. This is actually a requirement for publishing in journals like the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, that you have to include a design diagram. Some people add expected products from each phase into the diagram. That's up to you. Any of these visualizations can be useful also when you're communicating methods in a proposal or a paper. So then we come to making data. And back to my theme, use a variety of data sources and types. Basically, use whatever is available or whatever can be constructed. Record the contexts of your data as well as the data obtained, because clearly the context from which it comes influences the way you will interpret that data. You need to link your different source materials. By ensuring sources capture complementary aspects of the same topic, or maybe by cases. So by the particular people groups or other entities about which you're gathering data. So you'll have different kinds of data for the same, perhaps for the same cases. Well, this leads us into the sampling options, where you may have what would be called identical samples. In other words, the different sources of data apply to the same sample. Or you may have comparable or parallel samples where you try to match samples. So identical samples, a clear example of that is if you have a mixed form survey, then you've got open-ended data and closed-ended data for the same people. If you follow up with interviews afterwards with only a subsample, then you'll end up with a nested sample. If you survey one group and run interviews or experiments or whatever with another group, then you'd be wanting to see if they ensure that they are comparable in some way. Or certainly you'd need to ensure that they are covering the same topic. Or you may have a multi-level sample where in business or institutional research like schools and hospitals and so on, you're sampling different people from different levels in the organisation. And then, of course, They're clearly not answering the same questions, but you will, well, it may be, but you are gathering data that fills out aspects of the same topic or issue. Linking the diverse data or sources is important for being able to connect or compare information gained from those different sources. When it comes to analysing data, typically you will do some preliminary analysis of your data sources before you combine them. You might use descriptive, inferential, or multivariable statistical analyses to analyse numeric data, potentially also to analyse converted codes from qualitative data. But you need to be aware then of the statistical limitations on converted codes. That's a topic I'll come to later, or an issue I'll mention later. If you are working with qualitative data, or large amounts of text data, I'd certainly recommend using software to manage it. And if you are doing so, the software will also help you to manage and interrogate complex or mixed data. You can record some results from your statistical analyses, for instance, in with the text-based data and code those as well. Within the qualitative data analysis software, you'll use codes and cases, attributes and sets to organise and manage your data in different ways to allow you to interrogate it in different ways. I suspect you'll cover that in an in vivo session at some stage. You may use predictive coding or generative AI for alternative coding of large qualitative data sets in order to undertake topic modelling or sentiment analysis and things like that. At this stage, I'd say that's still cautious. And this is where taking a nested sample is particularly valuable because you'll use generative AI to code large data sets, or is used to code large data sets that are beyond the scope of individual interactive coding. But it's important to check the results of that against a human interpretation of the text with a subsample of the text and checking content of codes. AI will tend to pick up the more descriptive things and will often miss the more emotive elements. The same data might be analysed using multiple methods. And again, we'll talk about that more. So analyse data as they become available. And be prepared to adapt methods for further or later data collection. There's nothing worse than staying rigid and fixed. If you're finding that something isn't working, or you turn up something that's really interesting, then you may need to adapt what you're doing, maybe even adapt some of your questions. There are 7 at least core strategies for mixing or for integration, and I'll run through these as an overview model, and then we'll talk about some in more detail. So I suggest that there's a constant conversation that goes on between methods. If you can imagine you're working with multiple methods, and the ideas from one will influence the way you look at and work with another. And that goes on throughout the project. There will also be specific points of integration that occur. So the other core strategies for mixing are to construct one method based on another, to combine sources or data in complementary analyses, to compare across data types and sources, to convert data from one form to another to do a different kind of analysis. And eventually you'll need to compile or recombine what you've learned from all those different sources and put them together and convey what you've learned, the results. And I suggest that they are conveyed or arranged by topic, not by method. Now I'll look at some of these in more detail. So, constructing one method based on another, there's two different forms that might occur. You might use a qualitative method, for example, to design a survey or an experiment or some other more quantitative method. So you're using, or you could use a survey as a lead-in or follow-up with interviews that elaborate on particular points, so that the first form of data collection informs the design of the second. The second broad approach here is that the first form of data analysis might then inform the way you approach the analysis of further data or a different kind of data. And so the variables that you've developed or used in your quantitative analysis, you may use those as coding categories for interviews. The warning here is that often you'll find they don't fit well enough and you end up changing them. The qualitative, or you may have qualitative themes from interviews that guide your quantitative analysis or synthesis. The important thing here is that both sets of data, or all sets of data, are combined in the final analyses and write-up. I've seen too many studies in times past where someone's done some beautiful interviews and so on, and then done some very, maybe designed a survey or some other form of data collection that uses numbers, done some very fancy statistics and so on, and the results only refer to the statistics, don't refer back or look at the qualitative data that informed the design of those. My argument is, in a mixed method study, both sets of data need to be in the final analyses. Which leads us into combining diverse data. We do this to create something new or enhanced or more complete by integrating component or complementary parts. You might do it to use one method to extend another, or add to it, either a quote or a vignette to illustrate a statistical point, or to enhance or explain statistical results, or you might use statistical data to contextualize your qualitative data. The key point about combining data is you'll tend to compose. I tend to describe this as either weaving or merging the data together. So you've got, let's say, two equal status. You've got a pile of numeric data and a pile of text-based data, or codes and understanding from text-based data. You can weave those together in a narrative or description, or as you work with them more and perhaps develop models from them and things like that, you're starting to merge. They're merging. And so when you're weaving, you can still see the sources of the original bits of data. But once you start to merge them, the division between the sources becomes less clear. You might combine two different kinds of data in the hope of using one to confirm the other. And this actually leads us into the next topic. But before I head there, I want to make a note that when you are working in combining data, it's important or it's helpful to combine your records or results under using headings or codes. So combine them, organised by topic, using headings on paper or in Word, using codes in qualitative software, or possibly using a spreadsheet or database, but combine them by topic rather than setting them out. This is all I've discovered from the text-based data or qualitative methods, and this is all I've discovered from the quantitative or statistical analyses. That doesn't, if you combine them as you're discovering them, that helps you with the whole integration process. So that idea of confirming results or building on results comes through when you compare what you've learned from different sources. And a popular approach at the moment is to juxtapose different data in a joint display. So put different data side by side in a display, typically in Excel or some form of table. And what you're going to do is you may organise the rows of the table by theme or there's different ways of organising it, but most commonly by theme. And you'll look at either different sources of data or data for different groups across the row, and you're looking to identify patterns of similarity or difference in what's said there. You'll analyse any discrepancies and try and understand why there are conflicts, if there are, and basically work towards creating a narrative that covers results. So setting the data out side by side in order to compare it. The comparison is the process. The other kind of comparison is one that you'll use either Excel or preferably qualitative software for, to look at patterns in qualitative data that are associated with groups. And those groups may be based on demographic, categorical, or scaled variations. So it's best if your data sources are linked by case and you have attributes for the cases, and you compare patterns in what they say or in their qualitative data across those groups. And you're looking then to describe and explain the similarities and differences. How many, how do the different groups differ based on numbers? Do more people in a female group talk about this than the male group, or is it the males that talk about this topic, or is it the high status people that talk about it, or is it the lower status people that talk about it, and so on? But not only who talks about it, but how they differ. How do they differ in the way they talk about it? And so that gives you that ability to compare across groups. You need to then look at also in comparisons, regardless of whether it's done by a joint display or using a crosstab, are the differences substantive? In other words, are they related to the topic and tell you something about the topic, or are they a methodological artifact? So that, for instance, if you're asking people about the kind of care they receive, I was thinking of Udo Keller did this, asked people about the kind of care they received in a nursing home. If you ask them with a quantitative survey, you'll get one kind of answer. And if you talk to them and interview them, you might get a different kind of answer depending on how secure they feel in giving their answers. So that's a methodological artifact. And so you need to work out whether the differences are substantive or methodological. The third approach here that I'm going to talk about, third or fourth, sure, is that you can transform data to look at it in two different ways. You can convert qualitative codes to variables, and the software will do that for you very quickly and easily. And from that, you can generate counts and descriptions, or you can use them in statistical analyses. And here's where my warning comes in about the assumptions in statistical analysis, particularly inferential statistics, because the qualitative codes will not be normally distributed. And of course, the sample is not necessarily random. These are assumptions for inferential statistics. So it's more for developing profiles for comparison for prediction. Or you can use them in multivariate exploratory analyses. And this is where I find the most interesting use, where you can reveal clusters or dimensions or structure in the data using cluster analysis or multidimensional scaling or correspondence analysis. And in that case, you're not so worried about those statistical assumptions because the multivariate approaches are taking an entirely different approach to how you deal with the numbers. The other form of transformation is less common, is to create a narrative or a profile from quantitative data. I'll move on here. So you can use all these strategies in combination, and typically you will. So projects often involve a combination of strategies. It might be called a hybrid methodology, or maybe in a multi-phase or more complex structure. You'll use different strategies perhaps to resolve issues of dissonance and divergence. When there's conflict, appears to be conflict, you will do further analyses, and that often involves using a combination of analytic strategies. And then some current or newer forms of data, like social media and large data sets, or of data analysis using LLM, large language models and generative AI, are inherently mixed. You're dealing often with large qualitative or text-based data sets, but using a numeric kind of approach to analysis of those, and it blurs traditional boundaries between data types and between forms of analysis. Beyond all this, for integration to be effective, ultimately, the kind of integration in which new ideas are generated or theory is developed, or theory that goes beyond descriptive reporting is developed, it largely comes about in the mind of the engaged researcher. You're soaked in the data or steeped in the data and associated analyses, and you'll start to see how things might fit together. And then you can model and test those ideas against evidence. And the ultimate goal then is to develop warranted assertions, which are best described as the inference to best explanation. So I often talk about playing with data, and you just keep doing different kinds of analyses and so on. But as you're doing it, you're absorbing an understanding of what the data are about, and you start to see how things might fit together. Strategic processes that help this are to read widely, to contemplate, to use theory, to undertake case-based analyses, sometimes burrow down into particular cases, Explore all your options, develop arguments, but then thoroughly challenge those. The reflective side of it is to, as I said, become soaked in the data. You persist over time. It requires allocating block periods so that your mind is filled with the various data that you're working with. And if you're like me, you'll tend to wake up with ideas that you can then explore back in your data. Or you go for a walk and you get ideas. Reflective processes are helped by memoing and journaling or visualizing. So writing, doodling, modeling, drawing things. I find trying to create models forces me to think, where does this fit and how do these fit together? Sharing and discussing your ideas with other people helps. And telling people helps. Because to tell someone, you have to be able to organize your ideas and explain them. So all of those help you with integrating the data that you have. And finally, of course, you have to compile it and convey it. So I suggest write during the analysis all the way through, keeping a journal that initiates, reflects, and deepens your thinking. Keep a methods log or an audit trail so you can support your evidence. Then critically present results that show evidence of the mixing or the integration. And back to my theme of designing results around issues to be discussed, not the methods used to investigate them. Because it's the issues that are critical to your goal. And as you journey towards coherent conclusion, build an argument, tell a story, and support it with evidence. And finally, if you want to go further, there's a couple of books I've written that might be helpful. And I think back to you, Dr. Zia.
Okay. Thank you, Pat. What was very, very remarkable at this session was to understand how the philosophy that you follow, the school of thought or what you follow in terms of your approach, is the key deciding factor as a base for taking your research forward. You cannot be positivist in one and constructivist in the other, because that would be discrete methods brought together, not an integration of mixed methods in your research. I think our first session was precisely about these approaches to research, and that is what came through also very strongly in this session. We are open for questions, Zarek, if there are any questions, because most of the stuff in the chat was about the session or about people's names. I'm not very sure that I saw any questions, which is quite surprising, actually.
Ma'am, I was able to find a few relevant questions besides the ones that were not directly related to the discussion.
Okay.
So I will be reading them out one by one, and Dr. Bazeley, you can just take it from there. So the first question is from Naman Ali, who is from SMBBU Larkana, who asks, what criteria should be used to decide which method should have priority in a mixed method study? And can generative AI be effectively incorporated into mixed methods research without compromising scientific rigor?
Sorry, without compromising?
What criteria should be
Scientific
used
rigor.
to decide which method should have priority in a mixed method study?
Yeah, yep.
Without compromising the rigor, academic rigor, scientific rigor.
Yeah, right. That will depend entirely on your study and also on what data are available and what kind of methodology you are most comfortable with.
Yeah.
So there's no one that stands out. So, you can't claim, for instance, that using statistical methods are more rigorous than using qualitative methods.
Yeah.
all methods can be used rigorously, and one method may dominate. And I find actually, I'm thinking back to a major study I did a few decades ago, actually, but we developed papers from that. We had a report, obviously, that covered the whole study, but we also developed papers from it, some of which concentrated more on the more qualitative aspects, and some of which focused more on the more quantitative aspects, although each was also influenced and included some of the other. So it will vary depending on the particular questions that you're asking and the breakdown of those questions. And so one method might be more useful and can be used more rigorously for one particular aspect of your question, and another method might be used for another aspect.
There's a general tendency to think that statistical methods make a research far more rigorous and academically sound. But, this has been proved repeatedly as a optimal sort of an understanding of research, because qualitative studies that are totally without sometimes data or statistics are very, very powerful. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind. What's your research question? What is that you want to do? And then the methodology becomes secondary in that context. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I have a bias because I've always tended to draw on different kinds of methods, but some people find statistics completely unintelligible and difficult, and so they're going to avoid using them. That doesn't mean they can't do a rigorous study.
Absolutely.
I would suggest, though, the argument for mixed methods is that if you can draw from different methodologies, then you will have a stronger argument, potentially a stronger argument for what you want to conclude.
Yeah. Next question, Zarek.
So the next question is from Pat Bazeley, who's from SMBB Medical University, also in Larkana. He asks, how do we address philosophical differences between positivist and constructivist paradigms in mixed method research?
So becomes a problem for people who argue that using statistics is automatically positivist and using text-based data is automatically constructivist. And I would argue that that is not true. I would argue that statistics require as much interpretation as text. You need to interpret your hypotheses and your issues to develop hypotheses and to develop tests for them. You need to use interpretation to understand the results of your statistics. That is no more positivist than understanding text.
Yeah. Remarkable. My immediate response would have been, yes, the two are different, but you are right. Even to, unpack data, it's your constructivist approach that comes into being. And another person would probably see something else in that data that you have missed. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Absolutely. Next question, Zarek.
So the next question is from Hafsa Bakar, who's from the University of Islamabad, who asks, how can researchers resolve the integration paradox in mixed method studies where quantitative and qualitative strands differ yet overlap, especially when integrating findings across chapter with distinct thematic focuses?
So if your results conflict, I'm just trying to think, because I've written a whole chapter on this in the book. You do more investigation. You look at where they conflict and why they conflict. I mean, obviously, you're going to look, first of all, at if the conflict is a methodological one. Is it because the data were gathered in different ways and therefore picked up different facets of understanding of the question? Then you might look at, for instance, I'm thinking of a study of that we reported on German educational areas, I think it was, but basically you use regression analysis to identify where the source of the difference is. And then you can explore that source in more detail. Why is that one different? So if the statistics are maybe producing a no difference result, but understanding something qualitatively, you can clearly see differences, then you may modify the way you organise your statistics and explore it that way. And again, there's a study that used factor analysis, found no differences between 20 schools on no school stood out from any other on what particular thing they were looking at. When they used the themes from their interviews to organise the scales into what you might call qualitative factors rather than statistical factors, then they could get to understand what the differences were between those schools. So if things conflict, it's maybe do some case analyses, maybe do some analyses to find, but mainly you're looking for where's the source of the difference. Because if we understand a phenomenon, the phenomenon can't be split in itself. It's our views of it that get split by the methods that we use to understand it.
Yes, Sarif.
So
That was
we
a
have
good
another question,
question,
which
actually.
is from a couple of participants, namely Sabah Abu as well as Farah Muqaddis, and they ask, in mixed method research, if the qualitative and quantitative data do not need the same weightage in findings, how do we finalize results? What data will have more reliance in terms of finalization or the conclusion of the research?
I think that's more or less been answered.
Yeah.
If there is a difference, then you need to understand the discrepancy.
Yeah.
Because there isn't one answer that will be more right than the other. It's a case of finding out why they're different.
True. And that was the previous question also that you addressed. Absolutely.
So the next question is from Inamullah Khan, who's from Rifa International University in Islamabad. How do you decide whether a research question truly requires a mixed methods approach instead of using only one qualitative or quantitative approach?
I think my general argument is that if you're using a mixed methods approach, you will gain different perspectives on the data, on the phenomenon that you're studying or the question that you're studying, and consequently learn things that you would not have learned just by using one method. So it's a benefit issue, and whether you choose to do that or not, you may use two entirely different qualitative methods. It's not an issue of quantitative or qualitative. You might use two entirely different quantitative methods or two entirely different qualitative methods. The point is simply that if you take a second perspective on the question, you'll discover things that you didn't discover using the first method. And so that's the benefit of using mixed methods. Whether you decide to do that or not is often circumstantial. Yeah. Whether you have the time, whether you have the supervision that allows you to do it, and all of those other kinds of circumstantial issues.
Yeah.
We have a question from Dr. Sharifa Al-Adwami, who is joining us from American University of Kuwait. She asks, during the presentation, you mentioned something called a design diagram, and this diagram was often required by MMR journals. What does a design diagram look like? Is it something like the design diagram you shared in one of the slides on the 7 C's? Or is there a particular MMR journal you would recommend that could provide these design diagrams that we could review as examples?
Because the Journal of Mixed Methods Research requires them for all empirical articles, you will find obviously lots of examples in there. And I'm just trying to think. I think I recently saw an article that reviewed the different kinds of design diagrams that are being used. Look, they vary hugely. And it's just how best you can visualize what you're doing. It's most commonly, it would be just a flow diagram from through the various phases of a study and what data are being collected when. But it may be a more complex model if there are maybe lots of different samples that you're drawing from and so on. So there's no hard and fast rule. It's just the idea that if you can visualize it in a model, it makes it easier both for you as the researcher, but also for the reader to see where you're going and to understand what you're doing.
So we have a question from Khalid Mahmood, who is joining us from UMT. He asks, can we justify the integration of subjective qualitative analysis and objective quantitative analysis through mixed method design, showing two different results?
It goes back to the philosophical question of what you understand reality to be, and are you making different assumptions about what's real in those different approaches? And if you are, how do you justify that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this will be our last question because a lot of the questions have already been covered throughout the session. It's from Dr. Irfan Ahmed Abbasi, who is joining us from DUET, who asks, what are some of the biggest methodological or logistical challenges in mixed method research today? And how have you seen researchers overcome issues like unequal weighing of methods or resource constraints?
You have, I mean, resources and time would be the biggest challenges. So yeah, basically, yeah, having the resources and having the time and having the supervision and the knowledge. So many people, if they're working individually, and particularly if you're dealing with students who have to work individually, do they have the skills for the different methods that they want to use? So, some of us, I mean, I was brought up, if you like, as a psychologist with very, very strong quantitative skills, but then at a later stage developed quite strong qualitative skills or text interpretation skills. And I'm fortunate that I've worked across multiple disciplines and have a broad background and a broad approach, and that gives me a real advantage in doing mixed methods. So it's the skills base that's often the problem, and for this reason, a lot of mixed methods research is done in teams. But then it really helps to have someone with the broad skills base who's running that team and can understand what the different people are contributing. If you are limited and to in skills of one kind or another, then you have to at least have enough knowledge of that different approach to be able to understand advice that you're getting from someone else. So, yeah, breadth of training helps.
Yeah,
And willingness to learn.
That's key. Absolutely. I think you nailed all the main points, Pat. I think a very limited idea of your skill set, knowledge, attitude is not going to take you far in anything that you do, leave aside research. And so the larger, expanse of the ideas that you have and the knowledge you have and the skills you have, they, at the end of the day, they really help you do a better job than somebody who is very, like looking at things from a very specific expertise subset. And I think those are things we fail to understand, how the human at the end of the day is the real reason things become, good or marvelous. I think at the end of the day, that's the difference. So thank you so much, Pat. It's a joy to meet you. And we have been interacting for quite some time. And so today I get to meet you. That's the beauty of online from Australia. You are here. What time is it in Australia right now?
It's 4 o'clock or 3 minutes past 4.
Oh,
The
so
afternoon. It's
yes,
afternoon. Yeah.
it's afternoon. Yeah, so it's early morning for all of us, and so we have the rest of the day ahead of us. While you have a good evening, and thank you so much, Pat. Indebted to you. Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me. Yeah.
It's an honor. It's an honor. Okay, dears. Bye bye, everybody else. Thank you. You've been with us throughout, and this was a very good audience. Thank you so much.